You need to rest.
This happened back in 2009 and has resulted in my refusing to ever take a cab that isn't sent to me by a cab company. I'm not a big fan of Uber's business practices, but since its rise, I use it because now I get a name, photo, and license plate number up front. I live in a major city and I don't own a car because public transit and Zipcar cover my transportation needs more cheaply and easily. It was the first day that I was to pick up my son from the day camp my ex-husband had picked for him for the summer, and I screwed up and stood at the wrong bus stop to grab the bus that would have taken me to get my son on time. This was important, both because I'm super uptight about being on time for everything, and because the camp could charge a penalty if I was late picking up my son. Fair enough. The counselors have lives too. Having missed the bus, and this being pre-Uber era, I hauled ass over to a nearby hotel that I knew had a taxi stand. This was a nice hotel in a good part of town. Obama stayed there when he was in our city, so not sketchy in the least. I explained to the taxi driver at the front of the line of taxis that I needed to get to the YMCA by 6 in order to pick up my son, and that it was very important. He had some trouble finding the location in his GPS, but after some consultation with another driver, we got going. And this is where it got weird. I was texting with a friend, venting about my own stupidity for going to the wrong bus stop, when the driver tried to engage me in conversation. In our area, a lot of taxi drivers are from Africa, particularly Ethiopia, and this guy had a pretty thick accent. So when he first told me that I needed to rest, I was a little confused, but I assumed he meant that I needed to relax, since I was definitely stressed about picking my son up on time. Then he told me that I was beautiful and reached back to touch my bare leg. I moved my leg away, but I didn't tell him off because I was still focused on getting to my son and didn't want to have him dump me on the side of the street and guarantee that I'd be late. I kept texting with my friend, telling her that he was being creepy, and he kept telling me that I was beautiful and I needed to rest. I wasn't paying close attention to where we were because I'd never been to that particular YMCA and wouldn't have known if I was going in the right direction or not. That is, until he pulled a U-turn and pulled off the street. Then I realized that he was pulling into a sleazy motel parking lot. He reached back to touch me again as I went, "What the fuck? You need to rest." I remember yelling, "Fuck you," and jumping out of the taxi and running through a parking lot and out onto a sidewalk he couldn't drive directly to. I hid in the entrance to a tattoo shop, shaking, until I could pull myself together enough to call my ex-husband, tell him what had happened, and asked him to pick up our son. I wish I could say that I'd been self-possessed enough to get his details, but in the end, all I could tell the police when I called them was that a man with slim build, a thick accent, driving a yellow cab, had tried to take me to a motel for a rest. So, sleazy taxi driver, let's not meet ever again.
Would-be intruders.
So this happened a while ago, but it still freaks me out. I was going to uni at the time and had a day off. The previous night I'd stayed up pretty late, so the next morning I was definitely keen on a sleep in. At the time I was sharing a house with my sister, Liz. She has always been a morning person, and that particular morning I remember hearing her walking around the house, just getting ready for the day. Her boyfriend was staying over, and I could hear them chatting away as I drifted in and out of sleep. I remember them leaving the house together, the door closing behind them, and the car pulling out of the driveway. I knew they'd be going to go get some breakfast, and I wasn't ready to get up, so I fell right back asleep. I was used to being alone in the house, and it had never bothered me. In fact, we stupidly often left the front door unlocked during the day when one of us was home. We were living in a city at the time, but had grown up in a really small country town where no one bothered to lock their doors. So I suppose we were just in the habit. I don't know how long I'd been asleep, but I was suddenly startled awake by the sound of the doorbell ringing. It didn't just ring once. Someone was continuously pushing it, so it was like a constant loud ringing sound. I instantly thought it was my sister just being annoying, trying to wake me up, so I didn't get up right away. The ringing stopped, but Liz and her boyfriend didn't come in. I knew the door would be unlocked, so I wasn't sure why she'd stay outside. I started to think it was maybe a package guy or something, so I climbed out of bed and went to see. When I opened the door, no one was there. I assumed I had taken too long to get to the door, and whoever it was didn't leave a package or card or anything, so I figured it was no one important. I didn't think anything more of it, not until that afternoon anyway. I was in the lounge just watching the TV when someone began knocking loudly on the front door. I went to the door, and when I opened it, I was surprised to see 2 police officers standing outside. I stood there just in shock for a second, wondering what they could possibly want. They explained that they were going door to door just asking some questions about a case they were working on. They asked me if I had answered the door to anyone else that day, and I instantly said no. Then I remembered the strange doorbell ringing, so I added, "Well, there was someone ringing the bell earlier today, but I was still in bed, so I didn't get to the door in time." They started asking me a lot of questions. Did I see who was at the door? Any cars out front? What time was this exactly? I answered the best I could. After they told me that a couple of guys were going around ringing the doorbells of houses in my area, they would basically wait until the person had opened the door and then burst in, overpower the victim, and rob them at knife point. I later found out that they'd chosen this area because a lot of elderly people lived here and they were easier to overpower and often kept larger amounts of cash in their homes. It makes me sick to think that people like this exist. Luckily, the police had soon caught these guys, and I got a call to let me know that one of the guys had confessed and confirmed that they had intended to rob my house, but were, quote, distracted by something before anyone answered. I am just so thankful that they didn't think to check to see if the main door was unlocked, because they could have literally walked right in on me. It goes without saying that I always make sure the doors are locked now, regardless of who is home.
"404, not found."
A few years ago, I received a random text, a photo actually, with no accompanying words. This is not the exact photo, but it was the same idea. Cute, odd, puzzling, but not alarming. The number was from out of state. I live in Arizona, and the number was from Atlanta. I didn't know anyone from Atlanta, but I strangely knew the area code, because it's 404, like the not found error on the internet. I'd looked it up several years earlier because that's the sort of person I am. The next day, I replied back with a photo of the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, which I happened to drive by as it was parked in Scottsdale. A few days later, another photo came back in reply, a lit firecracker held in feminine fingers. I waited a few days before sending a long exposure photo I'd taken of a friend who was in silhouette, waving a sparkler in a spiral. I didn't think much of it. In my head, I explained it away as someone who was bored, perhaps someone a bit like me who enjoyed a little mystery. Over 5 months or so, we exchanged photos wordlessly every few days. At some points, it seemed perhaps hesitantly flirtatious, despite the fact I didn't know the gender of the person at the other end. I sent a photo of a bag of generic Fruity Pebbles and received back a photo of a gallon of 2% milk. Received a picture of a Lego minifig and replied with an empty 48 by 48 plate. One day, I received a photo of a road sign, now leaving Georgia, followed shortly by entering Alabama. I replied almost immediately with the city limits sign for where I live, as I was almost right by it when the Alabama picture came through. You may be ahead of me at this point. Now leaving Alabama was blurry, and now entering Mississippi was worse. Now leaving Mississippi never came, but now entering Louisiana came faster than I thought possible. Texas came a half day later. It was more than a day later when I got New Mexico, then Arizona. Okay, could be passing through. My city limits sign. It was recognizably the same sign, though a different time of day. I stopped replying after the photo of my city limits sign. Never got another photo. I changed jobs soon after that, and my cell phone was owned by the employer. I didn't ask if I could keep the number.
While I was in the shower,
I'm a 21-year-old senior in college, living with 3 other girls in an old 1-story house. We are located about a 15-minute walk from main campus, and the majority of our neighbors are college students. That being said, this town is notorious for being a little, well, sketchy. Millie is home to one of the first insane asylums built in America. After the majority of it being closed down, abandoned for years, the final building was shut down about a month ago, and the remaining patients were released. Now, I doubt this is directly correlated with my creepy experience, but I am not the only one who has had interesting encounters with strangers since the release in this town. 2 nights ago, after getting off work around 11:30, I came home to my roommates getting ready to go for a night out. I realize now how stupid it was, but we often had an open door policy, free for anyone to come over and visit as they please. We would lock the door at night, but the one time we forgot really came to bite us, me, in the ass. Around midnight, I was hopping in the shower as my roommates were heading out the door. We said our goodbyes and I told them I would be meeting up with them later. I just stepped out of the shower when I heard what sounded like the front door slamming shut. I automatically assumed one of the girls had forgotten something, so I called out their names. No response. I then hear footsteps in the hallway. I call out again. No response. Fear and dread came over me, and I immediately grabbed my clothes and ran into my bedroom. I threw my clothes on, leaned my ear to the door, and waited in silence to hear if someone was in the house. I hear nothing. I decided that it must have been one of my roommates grabbing something and leaving again, so I head into the living room to get my phone. 6 missed calls, and it's still ringing. My roommate Carrie was on the other end. I answered and immediately could hear the panic in her voice. "Lay, are you in the house?" Me. "Yes, why?" Carrie. "You need to get out. Sam drove by and he said he saw a man walking through the front door. He called the police, but you need to leave." I shit my pants. Nothing was going through my head besides pure adrenaline and fear. I wasn't sure of the man's intentions, but I sure wasn't going to wait to find out. While remaining on the phone with my roommate, I bolted out the front door and hid behind my car. I watched the house from afar, waiting anxiously to see any movement. My thought process was not at its finest at this point, and I realized I probably could have made much smarter decisions. As my friends approached in a truck, I sprinted out from behind my car and jumped in the back of their truck bed. Just as I did that, a dark figure scurried off into the woods, running in the opposite direction. I can only assume he had been inching closer to me as I was waiting for them to arrive. I screamed bloody murder and we floored it out of there. I refused to go back into the house until the police arrived and it had been triple checked. There were no signs of anything being touched or stolen, which makes me wonder what the man's intentions were. You can guarantee that I've locked my door every night since, and to the stranger who walked into my house while I was in the shower, let's not meet.
He cooked in our kitchen.
I posted my scariest experience yesterday, but my husband and I had quite a few freaky incidents where we used to live. A small town in North Carolina, and one particularly creepy one near our new place in Texas. This is one from North Carolina. It didn't scare me as much then as it should have, until it was too late. We never felt safe living there again, but had to for 3 more years. We lived in an old barn that had been renovated into 2 apartments, split right down the middle. Both sides had 2 floors and a basement. It had a pond down the hill behind it and a huge field stretched out in place of a front yard. Right smack dab in the middle of the field was a junk pile. Old rusty trash cans, tools, just junk. It also had the remains of an old doghouse our neighbor had built, then set out there to rot when the dog died. Important later. So we had neighbors on the other side of the barn. Very sweet older couple. They had a garden right around the corner of the house where the wife would spend her day while the husband was at work. They mentioned one day that food had started disappearing from the kitchen. I thought I was losing my mind until an entire loaf of bread disappeared. They chalked it up to their delinquent daughter stopping in without telling them and shopping as she'd done it before. Months went by, and every now and again she'd mention something her daughter had stolen. Canned food, prepared meals from the fridge, a couple of pots and pans, some toilet paper, so on and so on. They never reported it because they didn't want their daughter to be in trouble. We just thought the whole thing was sad. Weird stuff started happening around the house. We found the remnants of a campfire by the pond one day, and a bar of Irish Spring soap floating in the water. One day I looked out the window towards the pond and saw what I thought was a person standing near the water. Scared the hell out of me, and I pointed it out to my husband. The longer we looked, we realized it was actually an item of clothing hanging from a tree, maybe to dry. We were too spooked to go look, and it was gone the next day. Here's where it gets super scary. We started missing food. It had only happened twice, but the second time we'd gone on a rather long walk up our driveway to the mailbox. We'd left the door unlocked, and when we got back, the ingredients for grilled cheese were on the kitchen counter, and there was a hot pan still on the stove. We called 911, and they did a search of the yard. They didn't look in the field because it was just so wide open, with just the junk pile in the middle. Finally, one day our neighbor left her door open for 5 minutes and went to the garden right by the house. In that time, her purse was stolen from the living room. No cars had pulled up, so someone had been watching her and took the opportunity. She called the police, and the next day they did another search. This time, they went to the field and realized that there was an old makeshift doghouse. Inside, there was a bed made of old blankets, food wrappers in a neat pile, 2 beers, rolls of toilet paper, our neighbor's missing pans, heroin paraphernalia, and the sweet lady's missing purse. Everything out of it and stuffed with leaves to use as a pillow. There had been a heroin addict living on our property for months, stealing from us, bathing in the pond, and watching us for the best opportunity to do so. He never stole anything of value except the purse, so I think he'd intended to be there for a long while. I guess when he came back and saw his house empty, he just never came back.
Man in the window.
So I'm really freaked out right now. A little background. I'm in my late 30s and I live in a home with my brother, who works in personal security, and my fiance. I always feel really safe because my brother's home at night and he is armed to the teeth, and we have a pit bull who is very protective of us. So my brother recently took a temporary high clearance security job in Arizona, so he's being put up in a hotel out there. Before he left, he showed my fiance Rob and I how to operate one of his guns, just in case. We live in one of the safest towns in America. Nothing bad hardly happens. It's like Mayberry. But with all this recent clown BS and the increase of drugs, it's better to be safe than sorry. So this begins 2 nights ago. My fiance goes to bed early because he has to be up by 5 o'clock most mornings for work. So we are in bed, me, him, and the dog. I have my headphones on and I'm watching something on my tablet. Just an FYI, I snore bad. So my poor fiance wears earplugs. Around 11:30, my dog jolts up out of a sound sleep and starts growling. She goes over to the window in our bedroom and starts growling louder. So I get up to check. I look outside and there's a man staring at me. He's skinny and old, grizzled gray hair, unkempt beard, and vacant eyes. He looks at me and smiles, and I about lost it. Now my dog is straight up foaming at the mouth and barking. This finally wakes up my fiance and he comes over to see what is going on. The man sees I'm not alone and takes off. We called the cops and they show up and they start looking around. They find the guy's backpack. He has a notebook with my name, my address, and a diagram of my freaking house. They find beef jerky, sleeping pills, I guess for my dog, scissors, twine, electrical tape, condoms, and a rusted knife. They told me that they will be on the lookout for him, but I'm really freaked out. So, old man, let's never meet again. Update. They caught him. Not before he tried it again, though. Today I was home alone. Fiancé was working. My dog was in my room and I had all the doors locked, including the bedroom door. I drifted off for a nap when I hear someone banging on the window and dogs going crazy. I don't hesitate. I call 911 and the officer comes right over. Operator tells me the officer caught him running out of my gate, so I hang on the phone with her. They catch him and I guess put him in the car. Turns out the dude was someone who I worked with years ago. He had been in my house 10 years prior during a work barbecue I hosted. He swore to the officers he didn't mean any harm, but I beg to differ. But this explains how he knew the outline of my home. Almost 10 years ago, I had another dog. She was a mixed lab and not the world's greatest guard dog. I'm guessing maybe he thought I still had her. She passed away 5 years ago. Anyway, he's in jail, and supposedly he's got tons of warrants for breaking and entering and loitering, to name a few in Oregon, so cops said he'll probably be heading back there.
Stalked for nearly a year when I was a little girl.
This took place when I think I was around 7 or 8, so my brother must have been about 12 or 13 when this happened. Since my brother was now considered a teenager, my dad figured it'd be safe to stop asking my grandma to pick my brother and I up after school, because he couldn't since he was working. He was an extremely hardworking single father. Anyway, my brother and I start walking home alone after school, after getting off the bus. It was like a 2-minute walk back to our place from the bus stop. Shortly after, a middle-aged man with the creepiest fucking vibes started showing up across the street from our house and would just stare. Mainly, he wore this beat-up, extremely dirty and vibrant jumpsuit. Like, extremely vibrant. Only reason I saw him was because of that fucking jumpsuit. That looked like it belonged in the 80s. He wouldn't do anything. He'd just stare at our house from across the street. He'd usually appear 5 minutes after we got home, and then leave about 5 to 10 minutes before my dad got home. At first, I thought he was just a strange new neighbor. It wasn't uncommon in my area for creepy old men, pedophilic construction workers, and drunken college students to lurk around town. It was about all my dad could afford at the time. After a while, though, I got a bad feeling that he wasn't our neighbor. He grew somewhat ballsy. At this point, he had been openly observing us for about a half a year. It soon escalated from him just staring at us when we got home, to him physically waiting at my brother and I's bus stop. One, I already hated going home after school, And 2, now this creep is practically unavoidable. I was a bundle of nerves, and so was my brother, when we got off the bus and saw the guy standing there, staring at us. I immediately grabbed my brother's hand and started fast walking home. I hated hearing his footsteps lurk behind us. I absolutely hated it. My scaredy-cat-o-meter was finally off the damn charts, that I was begging my brother to call the police. Instead, he grabbed the metal baseball bat that was next to the door and told me that if anyone, besides our dad, walked through that door, that he'd kill them. I was so mad at him for weeks after that, but looking back now, I kind of extremely admire my prepubescent brother, who would be willing to do anything to protect his little sister. That night, we finally told our dad about our daily evening visitor. He was furious, but also sad that his kids didn't tell him sooner. We felt like it was somehow our fault that this man was following us, so we figured that my brother and I would just get in trouble for the man's actions. A creepy man had been stalking his kids for nearly a year without his knowledge. He was devastated. I sympathize with him now. My dad talked to a woman who waited at the bus stop for her son and explained the situation to her. She had thought that the man was someone he had asked to watch us, since she noticed our grandma no longer picked us up. After my dad talked to the woman, my brother and I never saw our stalker again. Years later, I found out that the woman, while waiting for her son to get dropped off by the bus, noticed the creep in the same jumpsuit. She walked right up to his face and told him, "If you don't leave those poor kids alone, I won't even call the cops. I'll take matters into my own hands and beat the living hell out of you. I never want to see your face around here again." She was a tough, mean-looking lady, but a huge softie with the biggest heart ever. Anyway, she was mean enough looking that the guy never lurked outside our home or bus stop ever again. Not sure if this would serve as any significance to you guys, but my upstairs neighbors later claimed that they used to see him go dumpster diving down the street from our home. So, old dude with the creepiest stare I've ever seen, let's not meet again.
My second birthday.
Note, this story is 100% true and has been verified by my immediate family. It was my second birthday, and my mom and my grandmother had taken me to our local mall to get my pictures taken at the children's photo store in Charleston, West Virginia. My grandmother lives in a small town about 50 miles away and doesn't come down that often, so my mom thought it would be a good idea that she have some photos to commemorate the occasion. They bring me into the store and consult with the clerk about getting my pictures. My mom had to leave for work and left me with my grandmother and the cameraman. The man proceeds to give my grandmother directions on where to place me and how to get me to look at the camera. He takes dozens and dozens of photos, eventually amounting to around $400. After about a half hour of taking the photos, the man informs my grandmother that I'm to go into the back of the store in a different room with him. He doesn't tell her why he wants to, but his hidden intentions were apparent to her. She tells the man that I'm not to leave her sight and that the session is over. She grabs me by the hand, quickly pays the man, calls my mom, and explains the situation. I get unnerved every time I think about this. This obviously was planned out, and it sickens me to think that he'd probably done this to multiple other babies, and more than likely succeeded. Parents, please be cautious of who you leave your children with. And cameraman, if you're reading this, let's not meet.
I could have been a headline.
When I was in my late teens, my mother and I were really poor. We didn't have some not so modern conveniences like air conditioning or a home phone. Cell phones at the time were just gaining popularity in my area. Now, there was a payphone about a half a mile away, down a somewhat busy country highway. I would regularly pick up cans on that highway to make money to obsessively use that payphone. I was a teenager. Talking to boys and my friends was the most important thing in my life. One Saturday, I was waiting for my awesome friend to come pick me up, and as such, I ran down to the phone to call her over and over until she showed up. There were two payphones side by side. These two really cute guys pull up in a really fancy Eddie Bauer model SUV. Funny the details you remember, right? And fiddle with the phone, then very obviously pull out a cell phone and make a quick call. You could stay on the phone for about 15 minutes for one quarter. My call ended and my friend said she'd call me back. The guys were still there. They started to tell me that they were going to the lake and that a few folks were going out there. They asked me if I wanted to join them. I told them no and explained that I was waiting for a friend. Then they asked me if I smoked. I said something cute, I'm sure. Then they asked me if I'd come with them for $20. I declined. Then $50. Every time I said no, the amount went up until it was at $500. At this point, I was really creeped out, but trying to stall so my friend would call me back. I didn't want to walk home, but after a few minutes, I didn't want to be there anymore. I started to turn to walk home and they get in the car. They follow me the whole way to my house, begging me to come party with them. I ran across the highway and up my driveway and hoped they wouldn't follow me. They didn't. A week or so later, there was a story about a girl my age that was assaulted by two assailants in my area. While there was no confirmation that it was the same two guys, my town wasn't particularly large, and I had my suspicions.
He tried to lure me into the bathroom.
This just happened to me a few nights ago, and I am still shaken up, so bear with me. I'm a female bartender at a small cafe that doubles as a venue. During the day, we serve coffee and lunch, and at night, we have a full bar with bands, comedy shows, etc. On this night, there was an open mic comedy show. Not a lot of comedians showed up, so we ended up closing up shop early, and I was ready to go home. I had a patron come in and order a single beer during the comedy show. He was acting nervous, but being a female bartender, I get male customers that are shy or don't want to talk to women, so I didn't think much about it. He sat down, sipped his beer, and watched the show. Since we closed early, everyone was pretty much gone, and I wanted to lock up and clean so I could get home. After I escorted the last couple out of the bar and got ready to lock the door, I see the man from earlier walk down the back hallway and into the men's restroom. Not even a minute later, he bursts through the door yelling, "Hurry, come back here, I need help." I stood at the opposite end of the hallway and asked him what was wrong. "The toilet is overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Help me clean this up." I could tell that something was wrong, and I replied, "It's okay, man, it happens. I'll mop it up. I'm just trying to close up right now." He continued to argue with me, trying to get me to come into the bathroom with him as I stood about 20 feet down the hallway. Finally, he walks towards me very aggressively and tries to grab my arm. "You need to come back here now," he says. I immediately put my hands out in front of me so he cannot come any closer, and I tell him he has to leave. He walks outside and I lock the door behind him. I check the bathroom and it is completely spotless. No water on the floor at all. I flush the toilet and the urinal and they are both working fine. I start to get nervous and I take my large pocket knife and clip it to the waistband of my pants, just in case. As I'm cleaning our espresso machine and putting toppers on the liquor bottles, I hear a tapping noise. I look up at the front of the store, which is one big window that has a few curtains covering it. The same man is tapping on the window, waving at me and laughing like a maniac. I watch him walk over to the door and pull on it. It doesn't open since I had locked it after he left. He starts screaming and pounding on the glass, saying, "Open the fucking door. I'm going to kill you." Fight overcame flight at this point, and I walked around the counter about 6 feet from the door. I pulled out my knife and locked eyes with him and yelled, "I'm calling the cops. Get the fuck out of here." He smiled and walked out of view of the window. At this point, all of my adrenaline just crashed. I locked myself in the office and called 911 crying, explaining that I'm alone and a man tried to lure me into the bathroom and was outside trying to get into my bar. I waited an hour and a half. No police showed up. I called my boyfriend and he drove up to the shop. My manager watched the security cameras from home, making sure the man didn't come back. I did the deposit and immediately drove home, my boyfriend following close behind me. My male busboy has been coming into work with me, so I'm not alone. And the managers have been keeping an eye on the security cameras while I'm working. So, crazy dude who tried to lure me into the bathroom to do God knows what to me, let's not meet.
Almost stalker.
This happened when I was 19 or 20. I was an attractive and very petite female, 5'3", 100 pounds. I was at a beach near my house in New Jersey in the middle of the day, but it was early May and about 60 degrees out, so not too many people were there. Maybe 2 or 3 on the beach if I recall correctly. I was by myself, in a bathing suit, sitting on my towel reading a book, when this man came up to me. The man was probably in his late 30s, early 40s, fit and what most people would consider attractive. He sat down on my towel and asked me what I was reading. I was already freaked out that a stranger would come up and sit on my towel with me, but I answered. He kept asking questions like my name, age, where I went to school, and I made up all of my answers. Then he moved over and sat right next to me, and started putting his hand on my crotch. I screamed and ran, and luckily there was someone else on the beach at this time who looked over at us, so he didn't chase me. I ran back to my car that was in a parking lot about a half a mile away. There were no other cars there, and I looked around and I didn't see the man anywhere. I assumed my scream and the other person on the beach scared him off. Fast forward 2 or 3 days later, and I get a letter in the mail without a return address. It was stamped from a post office in a town in Pennsylvania, where I remember the man saying he was from. Keep in mind, I was still living with my parents at the time. I opened the envelope, and it's 2 pages, front and back, handwritten from the man. I know I did not tell him any real information about myself, so I have no idea how he found my address or any of the info he wrote about. He knew my full name, the school I went to. I guess all stuff you could find online. My parents' names and cell phone numbers. He also wrote about seeing me at a place where I was a few days prior. I was freaking out at this point and shaking. He signed his name and left a phone number, but again, no address. I immediately went to the police with the letter in a plastic bag in case they would look for fingerprints. I told the detective about him touching me on the beach as well. The detective said he couldn't do anything because there was no evidence of a crime, but offered to call and scare him. I agreed. He kept the letter, and I'm assuming he called the man that day and told him to leave me alone. I never heard from him again, but I was sure I saw him following me in a car shortly after. After I ran away on the beach, he must have either followed me back to my house or gotten my license plate number to get all of the information that he wrote about. But I looked everywhere, and there were no cars behind me when I left or really anywhere in the parking lot. I was paying extremely close attention. I also didn't go straight back to my house. I drove about an hour away to my friend's because I was so freaked out and didn't want to go home until late that night. So he either followed me all throughout that time, got information from my license plate. Not sure how he would do that since the car is not even registered in my name, or had been following me previously. So, creepy man on the beach. Let's not meet again.
I called their bluff.
Long-time lurker, but this is my first post here. I apologize for any errors. Some background information. I am female, and at the time of this encounter, I was about 15 to 16. I grew up in a really rich town. Mansions were common. In fact, my house was one of the smaller ones in my town, and growing up, I was poorer than most of my friends, even though my family's net worth is about 1.5 million, so I was far from poor. Anyways, this is important to the context of the story. I was driving home late one night from a friend's house. It was about 1 a.m., and since he lived on the other side of town, I had to take some windy, relatively isolated back roads to my house. It was really dark out that night, and I was blasting the music and wasn't paying too close of attention to the road. There were no other cars out this late, and so I had the road to myself. It was a really narrow road too, so I was sort of glad that there was no one on the oncoming lane. The houses that were nearby were set far off the road, and their lights were off. All of this was normal. There was nothing to do in my town at night anyways, so it was always pretty quiet past 9 p.m. Then I saw something that was really out of place. Up ahead, 3 homeless people, 2 men and a woman, were on the side of the road. I didn't get a super great look at them, but if I had to guess, they were probably in their 40s. Now, I'm calling them homeless, but I'm not sure if they actually were. They looked it though. Their clothes were filthy, old, and ripped, and none of them looked like they'd showered recently. I immediately turned off my music and focused on them ahead. I remember thinking, what the hell are these people doing here? We are about an hour's drive from any major city, so I wondered why they traveled all the way here. We didn't have any sort of resources for homeless people, and it was not a good place to go begging, as most of the people here were pretty stingy. I was so confused. I slowed down slightly as I approached them. They were dangerously near the side of the road, and I didn't want to accidentally hit one of them. As I get closer, I think I see one of them move out onto the road. It's dark though, and my car has weak headlights, so I'm not exactly sure what is going on. I flick on my high beams so that I can see. What I saw almost gave me a panic attack. They'd spread out across the narrow road, completely blocking my path. There was nowhere for me to swerve without hitting one of them. They stood facing me, squinting. They weren't smiling creepily, and they weren't carrying any weapons that I could see, unlike a lot of the other encounters I see described on here. But I was still majorly freaked out. Fear shot through me. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to slow down or stop because I was pretty sure that's what they wanted me to do. I didn't know what they wanted, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Some of you may call me stupid, thoughtless, or mean for what I did next, but it was the only option that I could think of. I kept going in my lane, straight at the man who was blocking the part of the road in front of me. I did not slow down or speed up. I just kept my speed steady at 20 miles per hour, and I did not stop. I kept telling myself, he'll move out of the way. He's not going to stand there and get hit. They have to be bluffing. I approached and he still did not budge. None of them did. I started to get nervous that they really weren't going to move out of the way, but I kept going. Eventually, at the last possible second, the man jumped out of the way, and I was able to get past their blockade. I kept driving and didn't look back. So, homeless people who wandered into my town and then tried to jump my car. I'm assuming this was an attempted car theft. Let's not meet.
Open letter to the man who wanted to save me.
To the man who was almost my roommate, Thomas. We met at a McDonald's after being given each other's phone number by a mutual friend. We were both looking for new roommates, as you wanted to leave the halfway home/shelter you were living in, and I wanted to get away from financially and mentally abusive roommates. We talked for hours that first day. You were amazed by my openness and my lifestyle, and I felt it was important that you knew about how I was active in the BDSM/kink community. You told me your interest in it, and I did my best to explain where to get information and explain different terms and answered all your questions. Then we came onto a hiccup. I personally am strictly poly. Due to a bad history, I felt no need to explain our first meeting. While you are strictly monogamous. You questioned why, what it meant, how I loved. Why couldn't I have that one and only? After we left, we texted a lot. We met again, alone at a park, and talked about being possible roommates, and you were excited as you told me about your research. Your introduction to the lifestyle as it was. It was getting cold and you offered to hang out in your van, but I felt uncomfortable getting into your vehicle alone with you, so I insisted on my car. We talked for a while longer until I made up an excuse to leave. It had been hours and I was tired. I had work in the morning. I just had things I wanted to do that didn't involve you. The next day, our mutual friend insisted on lunch. He is the type of person that nothing scares him. He lives on adrenaline and laughs in the face of death, and he started our conversation with, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." I was already confused, but he continued, "Don't go anywhere alone with Thomas. Don't move in with him. Don't get in his car. Don't meet him anywhere private." He explained that Thomas had been talking to him about how much he wanted to kidnap a woman and keep her with him, and how perfect I would be because he could rescue me, fix me, teach me that monogamy was the right way. I took his advice. I wouldn't meet anywhere alone with Thomas after this. My friend and I would see him. I'd text him, but I'd always make excuses. So he started taking it out on my friend. "She's seeing you, isn't she? You are tricking me. You're a bastard and keeping her for yourself." Just getting more and more crazy as time went. My friend would give me updates and explained he was talking about kidnapping coworkers now. How, since finding out about the kink community and that both him and I are in it, he felt that he could tell my friend all his deepest and darkest secrets, and he wouldn't feel protective of me. I stopped texting back, and he started actively avoiding him when Thomas wasn't being aggressive towards him, which was hard when they worked together. The last time I heard, Thomas was fired for inappropriate actions towards one of the female workers. Neither my friend nor I have heard from him again. So, Thomas, if you ever stumble upon this, I hope that we never meet again.
Can't expect much else from Walmart.
This happened about a year ago, last summer. I'm 20 now, but I was 18 at the time, and I'm a girl. I used to live in a town that gets very hot during the summer, about 95 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit every day. I went to my local Walmart to do some light shopping and pick up a pair of flip-flops. As I was in the shoe aisle, I noticed an older guy, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, standing there too. My town has a good amount of drug users, and he appeared to be one of them. When he saw me, he started to say really gross sexual things to me. I'm used to being catcalled and experiencing this sort of thing, so I just ignore him and pick out a pair of shoes and continue with my shopping. He follows me down a few more aisles and then stops following me. After I pay for my things, I leave out the exit of the shop towards the parking lot. The Walmart is part of a strip mall with other stores, so I start walking right towards the end of the strip mall to catch the bus back home. After walking about 20 seconds, I notice the man standing next to a car in the parking lot, talking to someone in it. He sees me and breaks away from the car and begins to head in my direction. I continue walking right, and he begins to walk parallel next to me in the road, about 10 feet away, still yelling really gross things to me. At this point, this is more than just creepy comments in the store. He's following me outright. I noticed that I was approaching the entrance of a John's Incredible Pizza, a kid's pizza and play place here in California. So I run to the doors and make my way inside. I told the girl at the counter that there was a guy following me outside and asked if I could stay inside for a few minutes until he was gone. She let me and also sent 2 male workers out to walk all the way around the store to see if they could find him. They didn't, so I decided to stay about 10 minutes before I left to go to the bus stop. When I got to the stop, there were 2 women there who, when I told them what had happened, promised to stay with me and talk to me and keep me company. So, creepy guy who followed me through a parking lot, let's not meet again. This situation was also the day I decided I really needed to buy a can of pepper spray for my purse. Protect yourselves.
My mom was held at gunpoint.
I'm sorry I don't have all the precise details because my mom has since passed away, but this is everything I remember of what she told me happened when she was in her teens. My mom had just started driving on her own and went to the Rite Aid about 2 minutes away from her house in a really safe neighborhood. On her way in, she saw a guy leaning up on the wall next to the door, and she said she thought he was kind of cute, so she smiled at him and went inside. She finished her shopping and came out and got into the car. Suddenly, she felt something up against her side and turned around to look in the back seat, and the man she saw while she was walking in was in her car holding a gun to her side. He told her to drive, but she was worried about what he would do once they got somewhere more secluded. He told her to drive again, and she told him no. She said he was surprised and said, "Did you just tell me no?" And my mom said, "I did." He told her, "You're going to find out what it feels like to get shot then." And my mom said, "You're going to find out what it feels like to go to jail then, because I'm going to start screaming and someone from this parking lot is going to call the cops." At this point, the guy realized my mom was too stubborn and wasn't going to budge, so he got out of the car and ran away. The cops came and interviewed her, and she gave them his description, but they never caught him. If you knew my mom and knew how stubborn she was, you would not be surprised that this is how she reacted. It's crazy that it worked, though.
Worst birthday experience ever.
Last January, I celebrated my birthday. It didn't go well. I was playing some computer games alone in my apartment, and that would mean I'd stay up late at night gaming. I was so bored at that time because my friends were out of town. And then it was midnight. I was like, hooray, happy birthday to me. I ate pizza, drank some juice, all that introvert stuff. And then the phone rang. I thought it would be my friends calling to greet me because it's my birthday, but who calls late at night? I hesitated, but still I answered it. I heard a girl and a man speaking. I didn't recognize the voice. I asked them who they were and told them that they may have been calling the wrong person. It sounded like the girl took the phone away from the man and answered me. She told me that they know me and they were looking right at me through the window. The girl sounded drunk because she was giggling. I was like, what the fuck? I don't remember giving strangers my number anyway. I hung up and continued playing some computer games. After a few minutes, the phone rang again, so I answered and told them to stop fucking with me. And after that, I stood up from my desk and went to look at the window. I didn't see anyone. I tried to look carefully. I even used my cell phone to zoom in on some other buildings, but I found no one. I started to believe it was a prank call, and then it rang again. I picked the phone up, but I didn't speak. On the other line, they weren't speaking either. It was like they were waiting for me to go first. So I started to ask them what was their problem. The girl then told me that they were outside my apartment waiting for me to open the door. Now I was scared as fuck because I don't know who they are and what they want. I ran to my door and locked it and went to my kitchen and grabbed a knife because why the fuck not? And then I heard a knock at my door. I jumped from my seat and went straight to my bedroom and locked it, leaving my computer open and the living room lights on. It was the worst birthday ever.
Creepy old man followed me in his car.
When I was 13, about 1998, my family and I lived on a street right off the main road that went through town. Our house was about a half-mile down from the main road. At the corner on the main road was a barber shop, and around the corner on the right was a bunch of shops. One summer day, I decided to walk to a shop on the main road. As I'm walking up my street, a car pulls up with an old man inside. He asks if I need a ride. He looked like a harmless old man just trying to be nice, but I'm not stupid either. I said, "No thank you," and continue on my way, and he drives away. Only a minute or two later, he pulls up again and asks if I need a ride. He must have drove around the block or something. I assured him that I still didn't need a ride. After I turned the corner of the main road, there's a small parking lot on the right before I reach the rest of the shops. As I'm walking past the parking lot, I heard a car honk in the parking lot. Of course, it gets my attention, and I turn to see the old man in his car, smiling and waving at me. The shop I wanted to go to was only 2 shops away, so I hurry past the parking lot and head in. After about 15 minutes or so, I leave the shop. I peeked into the parking lot before walking past, and I did not see him there. Figuring he left, I went on my merry way. Walking back down my street, he pulls up again. Asked me for a ride again. I forcefully said no, and he pulls away again. This time I decide if he comes around again, I'm not going to my house in case he sees me. I don't want this freak knowing where I live. I would either go to my family's business, which is further down the road, or a friend's house. Whichever I could get to first. One more time the guy pulls up and says, "Are you sure you don't need a ride?" So I basically yell at him, "No, go away." And he speeds off. I sped up and I still had a few minutes left on my walk, but I didn't see him again, so I figured it'd be safe to go to my house. I told my mom and she got worried and was glad I was home safe. Never walked on my own after that until we moved a year later to a safer area. It's been almost 20 years, but the memory still creeps me out, especially being older and less naive about creeps. So, creepy old man in your car, let's not meet again.
Homeless pizza escort.
This happened a couple of years back when my friends and I were about 21 and 22. We had gone to Cape Town for our end of year holiday, which is what you do when you're young and from Johannesburg, with a group of girls who some of us were dating and some weren't. For context, Cape Town is often considered to be the best part of South Africa, and for good reason. And at the end of the year, there are parties every night, and the city is really vibrant with locals and tourists doing their thing. It's also pretty safe, relative to normal crime rates in the country. But there is still a bad homelessness problem here, and anyone who knows the country knows how poverty causes people to do just about anything. Things can get unsafe and dangerous in a matter of seconds. We were out for dinner and drinks on this main road where there are bars and clubs open all night. People everywhere having fun, dashed with a few unsavory people who were there for nefarious reasons, stealing phones and whatnot. Well, we'd had a few drinks and all wanted to go back to the apartment, so we left, and a few of my friends got takeaway pizza. Out of nowhere, this sort of well-dressed guy approaches us and takes one of the pizzas out of one of the girls' hands and says that he'll carry it for us to the taxi. Blah, blah, blah. These guys normally try to prey on innocent people who don't know what to do in this situation. But my friends and I went to government school in Joburg and immediately know that this is a scam and that something's going to happen. So we tell him no way and get the pizza back from him, walking towards a taxi to get our ride back. All the way, he's pestering us with the usual you get here, asking for change, asking for food, telling us we didn't appreciate his service, telling us sob stories. We're all a bit desensitized to that stuff, to be honest. So we tell him in a not so nice way to leave us alone. He obviously doesn't let up. In South Africa, these guys will pester you, but normally just to break you down until you give them something. But we make it to the taxi and get in and tell the driver to go. This guy comes to the passenger window. Passenger seat was unoccupied because tipsy young guys want to sit with young girls, I guess. and starts mouthing off about us owing him $5,000 and going off about this service of basically taking a pizza that wasn't his. There was no way we were going to pay him and tell the driver we don't know this guy and to go. The taxi driver has this confused expression on his face and either thinks that we do know him, he wasn't much older than us, or that we owe him something and are trying to make a drunken escape. So he doesn't listen and lets the guy in. This guy immediately jumps in and tries to launch over the front passenger seat, screaming and swearing at us about this whole altercation. We're all in a bit of a panic, yelling at the taxi driver to get him out. I'm leaning back, kicking up at this guy so he can't get in the back seat, and eventually the taxi driver gets the door open and pushes him out on the street and finally goes. The guy starts hitting the window. Girls are all terrified and crying, and chasing after the taxi until he just gave up. Other than that, would rate the holiday 10 out of 10. And it didn't stop us from walking around in less populated places at night and enjoying the sea breeze. But let's not meet again, fake pizza escort.
Almost mugged by gangsters with my baby.
I'm a male, and when I was 19 years old, I had a 1-year-old baby boy who I took care of by myself because his mother wasn't around. I also had a best friend who lived only 1 block away from my house, and he had just had a baby as well. It was about 9:30 at night, and my baby was not falling asleep, so I was bored and decided to walk to my friend's house and say hi. I bundled my baby up inside my sweater and zipped it up, with him facing my chest so it was impossible to see him in the dark, and I started walking. Between my house and his is a small trailer park that was notorious for having a Norteño gang population living there. I was aware of this, but my walk was only a 1-block distance, so I wasn't really worried. I got to my friend's house and we hung out for a little while until my baby finally started getting sleepy, so I decided it was time to walk back home. It was about 10 at night at this point and really dark and cold, as it had just reached the winter season. I bundled my baby back up into my sweater and started my walk back to my house. I'm a scrawny white boy who has been picked on and mugged and jumped and beat up by gangsters in my town several times before, so it only takes seeing one of them for my anxiety to start kicking into a panic. I saw 4 of them standing on a sidewalk in front of the trailer park in my direct path to my house. I started to get very nervous because I could only see silhouettes of them. So I decided to cross the street and pass them on the other side of the street. But as I did this, I noticed 2 of them copy my exact movements, but in my direction. The other 2 men paced around where they were, as if they were just keeping watch or standing by in case I tried to run from them. That's when I knew they had bad intentions, and they were after me specifically. I honestly didn't know what I was going to do, or what I could even do. I just gripped my baby tight and looked down at him. He looked up at me with dreary eyes, halfway asleep. I prayed to myself and wished that I'd never decided to take this walk to begin with. The 2 men got closer and I walked faster, but the way that they were walking would intercept my path no matter where I tried to go. I knew I wouldn't be able to run with my baby inside of my shirt. I was fucked. What were they going to do? What was I going to do? The men approached me without speaking a word. They started laughing quietly, and then they looked down to see my baby's head barely poking out of the top of my sweater. They simply turned around 180 degrees and walked back to where they came from, without a word. Then they all disappeared back into the shadows. I cannot tell you how relieved I felt. The sigh of relief I let out was so heartfelt and sincere, I cannot describe with words how good it felt. I walked home much faster and decided that would be the last of my late night walks, especially with my baby. After that, I had the most confusing emotions running through my head. I was so grateful, and in a very weird way, I respected the gangsters for what they decided to do when confronted with the fact that their victim was carrying a baby. Either they feared that mugging or hurting someone with a baby would result in much bigger consequences than what they were wanting, or they actually had some heart in there somewhere deep down. At least one of them must be parents themselves or came from a loving family. I don't know, but seriously, fuck those guys for doing what they do to innocent people. And I thank those guys for having some level of decency in their souls. Either way, let's not meet again.
My work caused me to miss a deadly encounter.
Love this subreddit. I have a story that I was only partially there for, but my ex-girlfriend was present for the latter half. So this was when I was much younger, in college. I'm sure you could find this as it was in the news, local Rhode Island news, if you tried hunting for it. I was dating a girl that went to school in Providence, Rhode Island. It was the summer and everyone was back home. My girlfriend's best friend had an internship back in Providence, and this girl had a 4-bedroom multifamily home to herself. The other 3 roommates were paying for their rooms but chose to stay home. I guess they could only get this place if they started paying rent 2 to 3 months prior to the school year starting. But whatever. One weekend, my girlfriend asked me to go to Providence with her to spend time with her friend. She is lonely and has nothing to do on the weekends. We're only like 1 hour from Providence, so it sounds like a plan. We head down and just chill for the night, drink, and do some cocaine. It's about 2 a.m. and we decide to walk out and get some cigs. Nothing special. We walk by a guy on our way home from the gas station who is just staring at us. Kind of creepy, but no big deal, as it's 2 a.m. in Providence and her house wasn't located in the best of areas, but certainly not the worst. We eventually all pass out and me and my girlfriend head home the next day. The end of the week comes and my girlfriend asks if I want to go to Providence again, but I can't, as I have to work all weekend, so I decline. She heads down there and her friend's boyfriend is coming to stay over. Pretty much a repeat of the weekend before. They all drink, but end up going out and partying a little bit. They are walking back after a night of drinking when they enter the mudroom around 2 a.m. They close the mudroom door behind them, which was left unlocked, and there's a dude, really raggedy looking, in there, waiting for them. He says out loud to them, "Get in the fucking house." They all turn around and he has a gun. My girlfriend's friend has already unlocked the door to the house and it's partially opened. Everyone is frozen in place and the guy repeats himself, "Get in the fucking house." The boyfriend then steps forward with his hands up a little bit, as to not seem confrontational, and says, "Hey man, calm down. It's all good." I don't know how the fuck this dude was brave enough to do any of this. As he says that, the dude shoots him. My girlfriend and her friend run into the house and hide under a bed. They can't hear this, but the assailant took off and didn't follow them back in. They don't know this, though, and are terrified, hiding under a bed, while the boyfriend is screaming for help. They think the psycho has come into the house and is looking for them. My girlfriend told me they were both silently crying under the bed while the boyfriend screamed for help. And this is the worst part. Yelling out, "Help me, I'm dying." The neighbors heard the gunshot and screaming and called the police. They ended up catching the dude. He'd been watching the girls for weeks. It was the guy we'd seen watching us the week prior. Worst part was, the girl's boyfriend ended up dying. Update. A user messaged me with some info and added a comment with it, but I'm going to add this to the post. Again, this was 8 to 9 years ago, and I can't find anything with a Google search. But with this info and the time frame, maybe some internet sleuths can dig something up. Yes, I remember when that happened. I believe it's right off Broadway, on Cortlandt Street, right behind the gas station. My friends had just moved into an apartment around the corner. If I'm not mistaken, my current coworker lives in this house with her boyfriend. They got a little bit of a deal but didn't realize why until after they moved in. There's still bloodstains in the hallway,